Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Shin Godzilla. And yes, I'm aware that I have been distancing myself from my old vlog format, but I really wanted to talk about Shin Godzilla, and I had already done a full written review, so it seemed really redundant to script and edit another review of the same movie at this time, so why not just vlog about it for a little bit? If only to promote my written review. So I was really excited for this movie. I am an enthusiastic Godzilla fanboy. I grew up with the King of the Monsters. I have a Godzilla poster hanging above my bed. I still have some of the toys that I've kept over the years. And I own quite a few of the movies. I actually still have a VHS copy of Godzilla's Revenge, which I still occasionally watch, even though that is easily the worst Godzilla movie. But there's just so much nostalgia there, and it's been fascinating watching the franchise change over the years. Godzilla began as a metaphor for nuclear devastation, and it was grim and bleak, but then it gradually changed into a family-friendly adventure series that got really corny, and then it became scary again during the 80s, and it's just been so interesting seeing it change with the times. But for some reason, like, Shin Godzilla really filled me with excitement that even the other American Godzilla movies didn't come close to reaching. And it got to the point where I was practically losing sleep over it. It's like I had to watch this movie. I needed it for it to be released in theaters. And then I was really dismayed when the release was a lot more limited than I had anticipated. They had said that it would be like for a full week, but that really just translated to 3 days, at least nearby me. One showing per day in a theater that wasn't as close as I wanted it to be. But I got those tickets and I murdered for them. And even though the seats weren't ideal, I was placed in the second row from the front and to the very far right. And because I can't see very well out of my left eye, that was like the worst possible place you could sit me. That did not hurt my anticipation one bit. I was impatiently waiting through the previews, and when that Toho logo appeared on the screen, oh man, it was a magical experience. I practically squeaked like a little girl, and I was hooked from second one. I thought Shin Godzilla was great. I loved it. I loved it a lot. I loved it a long time. But at the same time, I do kind of wonder if the hype may have affected my judgment. I need to watch Shin Godzilla again in order to truly review it objectively. Because sometimes a hype can it can go either way. There are going to be people who are going to overreact in their disappointment because it didn't meet their expectations. They're going to now feel rage and I believe kind of judge a movie unfairly. Other times it's going to force them to convince themselves that the film was much better than it really was. I feel a lot of that happened with Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I think people are either too generous towards it or too harsh towards it because of their expectations. And so much about the marketing of Shin Godzilla was just intriguing because selecting Hideki Anno to be the director was a very risky and creative decision from a studio that's very infamous for playing it safe. The trailers were really cool. The design of Godzilla, it definitely divided people, but at the same time, at least they were trying something new. And the positive reception just cemented my excitement. And when I actually critique the movie, when I break it down and study everything it does well, everything it does poorly, its flaws are kind of devastating. Like, I find myself wondering why I'm not bothered by this more, but I think of what it does right, and Shin Godzilla is a very unique entry amongst the Godzilla franchise. I've heard complaints that it is slow paced, and a lot of comparisons are directed towards the 2014 American Godzilla film, and that there isn't a whole lot of monster action, and it's primarily focusing on the human story. I disagree. Like, even though, yeah, Godzilla's appearances are certainly limited, I felt Shin Godzilla was mostly a fast paced affair. And the reason for this is Shin Godzilla is about the government's response to the Godzilla crisis. In most Godzilla movies, there's usually a big disconnect between the human stories and the monster stories, and that can really hurt the pacing. I watched Mothra vs. Godzilla in order to build myself up for the upcoming release, and even though it is a pretty good Godzilla flick, the big problem it suffers from is it spends so much time with boring human characters as they do pretty inconsequential stuff that doesn't really affect the overall story that much. They could have easily removed them, and the real content of Mothra vs. Godzilla would have been unchanged. So they're trying to get the egg back to Infant Island. They fail. They appeal to Mothra for help, even though Mothra should be doing so anyway, just to protect her egg. And then they just kind of watch from the sidelines. But in the case of Shin Godzilla, every single scene in this movie is either, well, Godzilla rampaging, which isn't as much as maybe you would like it to be, or the humans trying to figure out what this monster is and how to solve this problem. So there isn't a single wasted scene amongst them, and they're constantly, that tension is just constantly building off itself, and so you're just kind of getting more and more invested as it moves along. And I like the fact that there aren't any real character backstories. There's minimal character development. You don't learn anything about these people's home lives. There's no love story. There's no attempts at drama where characters have estranged relationships with their parents or children. You are only seeing these people based on how they react to the situation, and that is how you learn about them. And to me, that's what kept everything that much more exciting. I didn't feel like there was a disconnect between the human story and the monster story. They work together seamlessly. And the acting is really good too. They really do a great job at the growing sense of tension. At first they're obviously alarmed and rattled and confused and disoriented, but as the stakes continue to escalate because Godzilla is becoming more and more powerful every time he appears, you could see their fear, their concern, and that tension is pretty contagious. And the dialogue is surprisingly snappy and interesting. One of the problems with Shin Godzilla is characters talk so quickly. So if you're watching the subtitled version, which is what I did, it's kind of hard to keep up. Everything's just moving so quickly, and it's not helped by the fact that you're seeing, characters' titles flashing up on screen along with the subtitles. Occasionally, somebody will speak English, and then they'll have Japanese subtitles. I'm sure they will release a dubbed version when the DVD and Blu-ray comes out, but I don't know if I'd recommend it, because even if the voice acting is good, there's always something really uncanny about hearing someone's voice come out of somebody else's body. And I do think it will cheapen the performance because a voice actor is never going to be able to truly capture the nuance and emotional inflections of the original performer. Now, some people just really, really, really hate subtitles, and I'm not going to say you should stick with the subtitles if you just really can't stand reading while watching. I have no problem doing so, but even I had difficulty with this one, so it's up to you. You just have to accept that you're going to be watching an inferior version, even if it is more accessible to you. Another issue with the acting is they have certain characters speak English, and it's really obvious that they're not very good with the language, and I usually wouldn't bring it up if it weren't for the fact that this one character, I can't think of her name, but she's, at least I know her from the Attack on Titan movies, and she's supposed to be an American. She's half Japanese, but she is an American citizen, apparently born there. And yet she speaks with such a thick accent that it is kind of distracting. And the reason for this is she is Japanese, and she actually didn't know any English before production of this film started. And there's this one funny part where she's talking with a Japanese character, and they're both speaking English, and the Japanese guy actually seems more comfortable with the language than she is. So it's kind of a nitpick, and I do think the actress otherwise does a very good job. She's very charismatic and fun, but I just had to bring that up. The film is also very satirical. In this case, Godzilla is a metaphor for the Fukushima nuclear disaster that happened in 2011 and the tsunami which led to it. The 2014 Godzilla also did this. I think both films handled that element very well, but something about how Shin Godzilla executed it was maybe a little bit more memorable. But there's also some flaws which accompany that, and I'll get to in a moment. But the film is actually really about the poor government response to that disaster. And I thought it was pretty funny. I thought it was pretty clever. And I like the fact that they managed to accomplish this without making anybody in the government look completely incompetent, corrupt, or just like they're not bad people. They're trying their best. It's just that they're getting stuck in the bureaucratic red tape. And the fact that the movie does humanize them makes the satire feel more profound. But let's get into the spectacle. The miniatures are awesome. Easily the best I've seen in any Godzilla movie. At no point did I think to myself, well, that is obviously a miniature. I loved how they are able to composite the miniatures, Godzilla, and the people running from him, like all in the same shot. It's very seamless. It just looks great. The special effects are generally good, but here is where I have to get into the big problem I have with Shin Godzilla, and that is Godzilla himself. And that's what makes this review so strange. This is the only movie where I think I liked everything else except Godzilla. I think the design looks cool on its own. It's very imposing. However, it's almost overproduced to the point where it feels so much like a prop. It's like if you look at its face, there's so much going on here, and it looks neat, but there's not enough room for animatronics. There's no expression in Godzilla's face, and it totally robs him of his personality. Another issue with this is the only Toho Godzilla film where it's not a person in a suit. They used a combination of like CGI, motion capture. There are some animatronics, I believe, and a lot of puppet work. And it generally looks good, but this is the only Godzilla movie where he has no personality. He is a prop, and the fact that it's not a person in a suit means that there isn't a whole lot of body language going on. And that's kind of a shame, because that's always been the best part of this franchise, is the character of Godzilla. Whether he is the stern but loving father, malevolent force of evil, whether he just woke up underground for some reason and is having a very bad day and is very grumpy about it, or whether he's noble and a staunch defender of Earth. Even the American Godzilla movies, both the 2014 and even the 1997 version, they did give their monsters personalities. But in this case, I never really felt anything at all there. The eyes just resemble a puppet's eyes. I think they were trying for the same, scary, lifeless stare that Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, All-Out Monster Attack, which is one of my favorite Godzilla movies, but the worst fucking title that they could ever come up with. Where it's a very scary looking Godzilla, but even in that film, they gave the monster a personality, where it is a lot more malicious. And it does actually react to certain things. Here it's constantly moving forward and kind of ignoring everything that's going on around it. But the eyes were very distracting, and Godzilla actually starts off in a much more different form than we are used to seeing him, and it's very, very distracting to where it almost looks comical, and I don't think that's what they were going for, considering it's obviously supposed to represent the tsunami during this section of the film. And it's like, wow, that is the most adorable metaphor for a very tragic, catastrophic disaster. Especially considering it's so fresh in people's minds. That was just a couple years ago. So that was very strange, but the body language was really lacking. And I think the film wanted us to feel a sense of tragedy surrounding this monster. Sort of like the original Godzilla and Godzilla 1985, where through most of the film they're just terrifying. They're intended to be just, in a way, a natural disaster. But then during the endings, you find yourself feeling bad for it. But even then, like, I could tell when Shin Godzilla was trying to make me feel this way, primarily because Godzilla's theme song is called Who Will Know Tragedy, and it sounds very sad. There was a total disconnect between the music and the monster. So it's like, even though the special effects were technically solid throughout a lot of it, in regards to the monster, it always felt like a special effect to me. So I thought that was a real big area to screw up in. But they're experimenting with a lot of new special effects techniques here. So hopefully if they make a sequel to Shin Godzilla, they will know how to fix this problem, at least that I have with it. Speaking of which, the film is actually co-directed by the guy who did the Attack on Titan movies, and I hated those. And you'll see a lot of those same techniques being used here, but they look a lot better. I actually thought he did a pretty damn good job when it came to the action scenes. I like a lot of the random bits of creativity surrounding Godzilla. The atomic breath looks amazing, and you do see him reveal some new abilities that also I thought were really cool. And I think it's funny that some people are complaining about them. Really, like Mechagodzilla, in Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, he randomly magnetizes himself. He flies in Godzilla versus the Smog Monster. He's revealed some pretty absurd powers in the past, and I think in this case it actually makes a lot more sense, and it looks amazing. Once again, I think the special effects, especially how they interact with the miniatures, they looked really good. And I loved how in the finale, the human characters actually come up with a very creative and unique way of combating Godzilla, and seeing like the buildings collapse around him, that part looked really good. It just, once again, Godzilla always just kind of looked just too rigid because the special effects, or I should say the design, is just so overdone that there's no room for any kind of personality. Nevertheless, you could also argue that in this film, Godzilla is not supposed to be a real character. He's supposed to be a symbol. And, I might accept that when I watch the film again. We'll just have to see. So I strongly recommend that you watch Shin Godzilla. Support it. Don't illegally download it when it becomes available. If you can watch it in theaters, go for that. I know it's not playing in America anymore, but when it comes out on DVD and Blu-ray, definitely check it out. I cannot wait to see it again. If you want to read my written review, please do. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, all that nonsense. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And next week we'll be back to a scripted format with Jack Reacher. So stay tuned till then. Bye.